Well, hi, everybody. Welcome back to class. This is Module 2, Psychoanalytic Theory, Counseling Applications. I hope that you have successfully worked through the first couple of weeks of our class, including Module number 1, which talked about the core concepts of psychoanalytic theory, and that you are getting settled into the class and settled into your semester. I hope that you're doing well. Hope your family's doing well. And we're going to kind of continue today this week in this module talking about Sigmund Freud's psychoanalytic theory. So as we talked about last week, kind of what we're doing this week is what we will do all the way through the course of the semester. We're going to take these 6 or 7 different helping approaches because that's what a counseling theory is. It's really just a helping approach that we can use as counselors, as social workers, as advocates, as caseworkers, as we work with other people to help us to understand what their issues are, what their struggles are, and then more importantly, how we can help them. And we're going to get into that a little bit more today. And with every single one of these theories, we take the first week of the theory to talk about the core concepts. And then the second week, we talk about the application of those concepts. And that's where we are with psychoanalytic theory. We're going to talk a little bit in this module about some of the ways that we take the core ideas and we use them as we help people to deal with whatever issue it is that they are struggling with. So I want to say this again, these little mini lecture videos that I'm putting up at the very front of every single module really are just intended to be kind of a summary of the lecture notes and also to some key ideas out of the textbook reading. Chapter 4 is our textbook, a chapter for this module, and I want to encourage you to go through and review chapter 4 if you've not already done that, just looking for the high points and the interesting things that the author highlights for us. And then also to look at the lecture notes that I've provided for you as well too. And I'm just going to be summarizing in these little videos some of the key ideas that I want you to grab onto. And I just don't want you to read about them. I also want you to hear about them briefly. There is so much that we could say about any of these theories. I may have mentioned this last week. We could easily build an entire semester's course on just this theory, on psychoanalytic theory. There's so much we could talk about, and that's really true for any of these theories. So we're kind of moving quickly and we're kind of hitting the high points, and that's what I'm going to do in this little lecture video as we talk about the application of the concepts that we talked about last week. Also, too, real quickly before we review, just a word of apology, just briefly. I looked in our module this week, and it looked like some of the lecture notes, the formatting is maybe a little bit messed up. It's there, but where there should be some spaces between paragraphs, it looks like all that's kind of gotten bunched up. That happens sometimes whenever we go from one computer system to another. Not a big deal. All the information is there. It just may not look exactly the way it should look, but that's okay. So I just wanted to give you a heads up to that and apologize to you for that. So let me ask you this question, then we're going to review real quickly. Do you know someone, or have you ever heard of someone who has never worked through, and I'm going to use air quotes here, an old unresolved issue in their life? Do you know anyone like that? Maybe in your own life you've experienced that. Do you know of someone, have you ever heard of someone who today as an adult struggles with problems that really are connected with something from the past? Maybe they've never worked through or dealt with something, or they're carrying something around with them. Have you ever heard of the analogy baggage, of carrying around baggage? That analogy actually fits with this theory, psychoanalytic theory. I don't want to get too personal, but I have someone in my personal life, in my personal circles, not a member of my family. This is a friend of mine who I've been friends with for many, many years. And this person is a good person. This person is a very solid person in many, many ways, a very successful person at their business. But some bad things happened to that person in childhood, and they have confided some of that in me. Some people did some things and said some things and didn't do some things towards them that they've never gotten over. They have all this resentment. They have all this unforgiveness. They have all this pain. You might even call it trauma that they, as an adult, this happened way back in their life. Today, they still carry that around with them. Maybe, does that make sense? Maybe you know someone or you've experienced that idea that people go through difficult things in our lives. We all do. But what happens if we never deal with those things? Whatever happens if we never resolve those issues? What happens if we never come to terms or make peace with those issues? Well, Freud had an interesting idea, and the idea is this: we carry them forward with us into adulthood. And if we're not careful, those old issues just pop up and create problems for us today. And that example I gave you, my friend, who's a good person who I've talked to, I wouldn't say I've counseled with him because we're more friends. But that person today struggles in relationships. That person struggles with being overly controlling and perfectionistic. This person takes things really, really personal, gets wounded very easily, and is very sensitive. And you got to be careful. Even I, as a friend of theirs, you got to be careful what you say around them. Do you know someone like that? Or maybe are you like that? Are other people like that with you, right? Where people got to be careful what they say because this person's very touchy, we would say, gets very angry, very, very resentful, very, very easy. In my opinion, that probably is not just how they are. If you were to ask this person, they would probably say, "Ah, it's just kind of how I am." Probably not. Actually, probably, no, this is just a counselor speaking. This person probably is that way today because they've never really dealt with what happened to them years ago and they carry it around with them. And that's why they are the way they are. In my personal opinion, this is just my opinion. I've shared this with this person, and the person is not really open to the idea, but here's what I've shared with them. If you'll deal with that stuff, if even as an adult, if you will deal, because you can, if you will deal with and put to rest some of that stuff, your controlling and your distrust, a lot of that's going to change and probably get better. Maybe not totally 100%, but probably it's going to get better because this person carries around with them. I use the analogy of a backpack. They carry around, like in their backpack, all this hurt, all this pain, and it pops up in their life over and over and over again. Well, that's kind of what we're going to talk about in these little lecture videos with module number 2, because we're talking in this section about psychoanalytic theories, counseling approaches. And let's just review for a little bit what this theory said in module 1, what we learned in module 1 about this theory. And because all of what I just shared about my friend and those questions I just asked you kind of fit with this module. So number 1, this is Sigmund Freud's theory, psychoanalytic theory. We're going to talk in just a second about what the term psychoanalytic means. This was the first counseling approach developed, organized and structured and developed. And Freud had some interesting ideas that today we still draw from today. As I shared with you in previous lectures, we're not going to talk about anything in this class that today as helpers we don't draw from. With every theory, there are ideas that really we've kind of moved away from in a lot of ways. And so what I want to highlight for you, what I highlighted last week, what I want to highlight in this module, is I want to highlight for you the key ideas that in this case Freud developed that still today as helpers we draw from all the time in our work. Freud believed that as men and women we are complicated and complex, multi-layered. The idea of like an onion, like peeling an onion. When you peel an onion, you peel one layer back, there's another layer. You peel that layer back, there's another layer. And Freud believed that getting to the bottom of people's problems is multi-layered. You peel one layer back, you see another issue, you peel another layer back. The reason for that is because Freud believed that that our mind, that as humans we are complicated and complex. Our emotions are complicated. Our behavior is complicated. Our mind is the way in which our behavior operates is complicated, right? So multi-layer, complex, mysterious, that kind of thing. Freud believed that we have a unique personality. Freud was very interested in how we are wired. And we learned last week that, Freud believed that all of us have within us this thing called personality. And each of our personalities have these 3 distinct components: an id, a superego, and an ego. And they develop in that order. And Freud would say, this theory would say that every single one of us has within us those 3 personality components. Each one has kind of its own role, its own kind of face, so to speak, right? And so this theory says that's part of what makes us complicated and complex is our personality, our unique 3-layered personality. Freud believed that personality develops in childhood. So this is a theory that puts a strong emphasis in childhood and early life experiences, especially the first 6 to 8 years of our lives. And Freud believed that who we are as people, how we look at the world, how we think, the way our emotions act, respond, all those kinds of things are directly connected to early childhood experiences, good, bad, and neutral, right? So Freud believed that our personality develops early in childhood. So this is a theory that puts an emphasis on childhood. Freud believed that the bulk of our mind is unconscious or subconscious, and that only a small part, like the tip of an iceberg, of our mind is conscious awareness, and that the bulk of our mind is unconscious awareness. That's another example of when we talk about how this theory says that we're complex and complicated. That's another example of that. The idea that our mind is the bulk of our mind is unconscious, and that oftentimes our unconscious mind is what holds old issues, negative things that we're not able to deal with, traumatic events. It's got a little bit of a self-protection kind of a quality. Our unconscious mind does, this theory believes. But this theory just believes that not only do each and every one of us have three parts of a personality, all of us have an unconscious or subconscious mind, and we have a conscious mind as well too. This theory also says and teaches that our unconscious mind shows itself, that it pops up every once in a while. We're talking more about that in this little mini lecture. That our unconscious mind shows itself through dreams, through sarcasm or jokes. Our unconscious mind sometimes shows itself in how we struggle and how we behave and the problems that we have. We call symbolic behavior or symbolic problems. And so the idea that our unconscious mind kind of shows itself, right? So that's a little bit of an overview. Again, there's so much more we could talk about. And that's just a little summary of last week's kind of lesson of what this theory teaches about who we are as people, as who we are as human beings, right? And kind of the idea then is this. So with that as sort of a foundation for us to work from, what then, if you and I were out there today and we were working with people in social services, how would we draw from those ideas to help people deal with their struggles or their issues? Okay, so that's what we're going to talk about in this module, basically. So here's the key idea. And again, go and read the lecture. In your lecture notes, there's more detail than I'm going to give to you in just this little video, right? But here's the main thing. The main thing is this. If this theory teaches that the bulk of our mind is unconscious, which this theory does, then here is what our role is as helpers. Our main role as helpers is to help make the unconscious conscious, raising people's awareness as to the possibility that maybe some of what they struggle with has unconscious roots. And that sounds unusual, but we do that really actually a lot in counseling. And so this idea of helping people to, number one, consider the possibility that maybe part of what they're struggling with is maybe an old unresolved issue potentially. So the idea of making the unconscious conscious is one of the key goals of this theory's helping approaches, right? That's the main. Now there's all kinds of ways in which we do that. I'm going to review a few of those with you here in just a second, okay? But the main goal with this theory from a helping perspective is helping make the unconscious conscious, right? This is also a theory, which we'll talk about here in a little bit, from a helping perspective, where a lot of what we do is we help people, which again, it can be controversial. We help people kind of go backwards sometimes and deal with some old issues. I'll talk more about that in just a second here too. But the idea of helping make the unconscious conscious. So let's talk just real quickly, some very, very briefly about ways in which a helper using this approach might do that. So let's first start with the name of this theory. This theory is called psychoanalytic. Psychoanalytics. Let's break those two words down. The word psycho does not mean like crazy, like psycho crazy. In this context, the word psycho means psychology. So psychology refers to our thoughts, our beliefs, our behavior, our emotion, our mind, and our brain. Psychology, psycho. Analytic. What does the word analytic mean? Well, the word analytic comes from the word analyze. Psychology analyze. Psychoanalytic. That's what this theory really is. Well, what does it mean to analyze something? Let me ask you that question. So if I were to say, hey, analyze this, what would you do? Well, when we analyze something, we do several things. We take it and we start breaking it down. That's one way you would analyze something. You would start breaking it down. You take a larger problem and you would start breaking it down into smaller pieces. And that's kind of what this theory sort of says we ought to do with people. With analyze, what you're doing is you're looking for the cause of something. You're looking for how things are related to each other. You're looking past the obvious to maybe some deeper kinds of issues. That is also what being analytical or uh, being analyzing something can also mean as well too. When we analyze something, we try to kind of connect dots, putting puzzle pieces together, right? And to me, that's kind of how I always think about psychoanalytic theory. It's kind of like taking a broken puzzle and you're putting a bunch of pieces and you're saying, hey, doesn't this piece go here? Yeah, it goes here. Where does this piece go? Oh, it goes over here. And you're kind of putting a puzzle piece together as you are helping people to understand themselves and understand who they are, understand why they feel how they feel, understand why they say what they say, understand where do their struggles really come from and what can they do about it. That's kind of what psychoanalytic, analyzing the psychology of people, is literally what this theory sort of promotes and sort of teaches. So again, it would be referred to as an analytical approach to counseling. An analytical approach just means that we take an analytical perspective whenever we use psychoanalytic theory. And as a counselor, I'll just speak personally. Through the years, I would never say that I am a true, Freudian therapist. As far as totally 100% devoted to Freud's approaches per se. But I don't think there's a counselor around or a therapist around who doesn't, even today in 2020, doesn't draw from these ideas that Freud first gave to us. And that is, this first idea is the importance of breaking down problems and looking for deeper meanings, being analytical in our work with our clients as far as helping them to understand who they are and what they are struggling with and why they are struggling with it. Okay, so psychoanalytic. Okay, so here's what I want you to do. That's going to be the end of this first little mini video. I want you to come to video number 2. And what we're going to do is I want to give you some examples, some really quick examples of ways in which we help break down people's problems and help, again, make the unconscious conscious. That's the main thing we're trying to do. Okay, so come back for the next video and we'll talk about analytical approaches. Okay, see you next time.